men need to make better men. Can you just expound on that first one there first? Because I think that is so relevant.
Yeah, so when I think about, there's a verse in the Bible that says iron sharpens iron. Mm-hmm. And we could first look at making better men of the men around us, of the men that are our sons, of the men that we lead, of the men even that we follow. And so in some way, we could make better men of them by challenging them and making the best of them and believing the best in them.
Right.
John Maxwell says, put a 10 on every head. In other words, look at someone and go, that's a winner. I'm going to believe in them and I'm going to get behind them and support them. But really, there's no such thing as me making a better man out of someone else if I am not making a better man out of me.
Wow. Welcome to the Leading with Vulnerability podcast. I'm your host, Yuma Barnett, and today my guest is R.D. Saunders. I drove up here to Atlanta to the John Maxwell Leadership Center. Very gracious and a lot of gratitude. Thanks for having me in your space today. I was introduced to you by Don, and just because Don Barden, I know that you've got a great story, and I can't wait to get into the conversation, and I'll just hand it over to you and let you introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you, Yuma. Such a pleasure to be here with you and with your audience, and I love the concept of your podcast, so I'm truly honored to be a part of this. So I am the husband of one wife with 2 sons and 3 pets. Live here in the Atlanta area, have for 20 years or so, but get to work with Dr. John C. Maxwell, one of the leading teachers of leadership on the planet and beloved figure by many, including Don Barden, our mutual friend. So just so honored to be here and serve you guys and do whatever I can to be a blessing to you.
Well, I really appreciate it. You have a beautiful facility here.
Oh, yeah.
And if you read in the back there, it couldn't be a more poignant saying for a podcast on vulnerability. Awesome? And that's where we'll start. We'll just get right into it. And for the reason behind this whole podcast that I'm doing, especially in these first installments, is what's vulnerability? What's the definition of vulnerability to you?
You know, I think vulnerability is something that comes from security. The person that's insecure has a really tough time being vulnerable, being able to be honest about their challenges. But in some ways, I think vulnerability is really sewn into our DNA. Part of the reason vulnerability is sewn in our DNA is I believe we were created to be interdependent. We were created with needs so that we would work with others, so that there would be sort of missing pieces within us that others have as strengths. So in my mind, vulnerability is critical for the ability to function as a team. If someone thinks they can do it all, then they're not going to work well in a team. Mm-hmm. And we can always do considerably more together as a team than we can by ourselves. So vulnerability to me is a secure leader being able to be very honest about their areas of weakness and struggle, not just to bring in other aspects of teamwork, but also to help other people who are struggling with their own vulnerability to know it's a real thing that every person, great or not, struggles with. Yeah,
and I like how you say that, the team aspect of vulnerability. It's owning your truest self, your best self, and hearing you speak or somebody else speak and go, oh, I didn't know he was going through that same trial or tribulation. Let me talk to that guy. And then your team gets bigger and you build on it. But it wouldn't happen if you didn't have vulnerability and the courage to go out and ask and the courage to listen, right? So
that's true.
So 22 years plus as a pastor. I
did,
right?
22 years, yes.
I'm sure there were some vulnerable moments in there at that time. Can you speak a little bit about those, some of those years and some of the moments that stick out to you?
You know, interestingly, when you serve as a pastor, one would think that being vulnerable is sort of part of the job. But one of the things I found out is that when you become successful at anything, whether it's serving in ministry or in any endeavor, it's easy to feel pretty comfortable with being a success and believing that, you're really good. And then you'll have an assignment that comes along. And I've often said that you're either going to choose humility or humility will be chosen for you. And I had pastored very successfully, had usually double, triple, or even quadruple the growth of the congregation. And then I came to serve a church that it just, for whatever reason, nothing seemed to go well. And it was amazing how that changed me. Mm-hmm. I instantly began to feel an affinity for any guy or gal that's struggling in life. Yeah. And there was something in me that allowed me to connect with people in a way I never had before. Because here's what I found out. Everyone struggles. Everyone has battles. Everyone has the thing that I had a guy say one time, he said, there's a butt whipping reserved for everybody.
That's right.
And it doesn't matter how good you are, there is the thing that will bring you down to earth.
Right.
And that thing actually makes you a part of the rest of the world, which is a wonderfully liberating thing because it allows you to attract people to yourself in a way you never could before.
Right, absolutely.
So that experience really humbled me.
And I think when you think of a pastor or a leader on any scale, what you see you're up on the stage, you're preaching, you're giving your message, you're prepared. What's it like? Because people struggle with their conflict or with their religion. They struggle with their faith. It comes in seasons, depending on where you're at. What is it? How do you handle when somebody comes to you and says, "I didn't agree with what you were saying," or can you explain more? I'm struggling with my faith. How do you help somebody recenter and find themselves?
Yeah, I really feel sorry for someone that long ago felt like they got it all figured out and didn't need any help, and didn't have any confusion. Young me might have said, well, you can disagree with, you can be wrong if you want to, in disagreeing with me. Yeah. The more experienced, more seasoned, more vulnerable me says, man, that's cool. No problem, buddy. Because for me, being in relationship with that person was more important than being right.
Right.
And I know so many guys, they've just got to be right. They've just got to be right about everything. And for me, I'd rather have the relationship right than whatever point I'm trying to make be right.
Yeah.
So I guess that how I've changed is I don't need to win, but I do need to connect.
Right.
And I'm more interested in winning with people than I am winning with arguments.
Absolutely. And you say something there, going off script a little bit, relationships, right? Mm-hmm. So a big thing when anybody's in transition, whether from college into the workplace or from the military into the civilian sector, everything's network. Sure. And what I say is, yes, but build relationships in there. It's not about how many people you connect with on LinkedIn or Facebook. It's about who you talk to and build a relationship with. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I have to tell you that I would not be in this role, and I would not have had the last two roles if it was not for one deeply meaningful relationship I had with a gentleman by the name of Doug Carter. And Doug was my college president. I met him when I was 17. He recruited me to my college, and he has been a lifelong friend. And he recommended me for this role at Equip and the John Maxwell Leadership Foundation. It was a role that he had had since the founding of this organization in 1996. And he recommended me for that role, and then a role I had just right after leaving the pastorate that was such a wonderful role. And I think, it would have been important maybe for me to meet other people, but I'm so glad I built a really, really good relationship with one fantastic person. So I completely agree.
Right, and that's a relationship. When I think of a relationship versus a network, a relationship is lifetime, right? You can always go back to that person for this role if you're in a season of change and ask what else they might know, or you're just able to build more off a relationship than you are some of these meaningless in this society, of just instant gratification and clickbait. Yep. A relationship still means something.
Absolutely.
So I ask all my military guests, what was your most challenging day in uniform, right? And I usually don't get the answer that it was the combat or the guy's loss. It's usually the time they miss with their family or a moment, something their son or their daughter or their spouse said to them before they left or when they come home. A pastor, you have to travel a lot. You're you're uprooting a lot, and especially in your early days, trying to find a congregation and you move. I know I went through a lot of pastors when I was growing up. What was one of those most challenging days that you've had in your last 22 plus years?
Sure. Oh, I have to say that obviously there have been many very challenging ones, but for me, more challenging than the work has been things with my family. So I have a son that, thank God, he's doing really well now, but probably now about 18 months ago, he was really struggling, and there was some serious concerns I had about his emotional health.
Oh, wow.
And we were haunted by this. It had never affected us like it did, where we couldn't sleep at night, where we were wrestling with this. And one of the things I've learned is that for me personally, I have to come to a new level of trust and dependence on God in those moments. I also have to understand there are certain things I cannot control. And sometimes the reason that we are so bothered is that we're trying to exert a level of control that we weren't called to have, we weren't meant to have. Mm-hmm. And we have to let go a little bit and relax and trust. And we find ourselves a lot more capable of managing the situation when we're not so upset by it, when we're not so bothered by it, because we've got an undue level of control that we're trying to exercise in that situation. Right. So even for me as an older man, just a couple of years ago, having to learn some things and some lessons, very challenging for us.
And I think that speaks to the lifelong learning,
yes,
right?
Sir.
Not only lifelong learning as in the academic sense, but lifelong learning of yourself, because you're going to change as time grows. You know,
sure.
If people who met me 20 years ago wouldn't have pictured Yuma doing a Leading with Vulnerability podcast, you know, I was a barrel-chested freedom fighter taking Rangers as the objective. But as you grow and change, you got to learn, continue that
evolve.
Emotional intelligence is so important, and understanding of self.
Yep.
So when you're close to a problem like that, or with your son, right? Are there some other techniques or strategies other than kind of stepping back that you can use to help you when a problem is right in front of you and all you want to do is help, but you don't know, not sure how?
Yeah, and I know I'm talking to a group of folks that are used to taking charge and taking action. Yeah. And I'm not by any means suggesting that you just lay back all the time and let things happen. But what I am suggesting is there's an action we're called to and an action we're not called to. There's a responsibility we have and a responsibility that is someone else's. And figuring out that responsibility sometimes, I heard a guy say one time, it's the difference between neology and theology. Right. Theology is when you look in the Bible for an answer. Neology is when you just get on your knees and say, God, help me.
Right.
And our great President Abraham Lincoln said that I have gone to my knees often because of the absolute knowledge I had nowhere else to go. And I think for us at times, we're going to find ourselves at the end of ourselves, right, where we do not have any answers, where we do not have, as guys, we're used to knowing everything.
Right.
I tell couples all the time that I've married a lot of couples, and there'll be a situation where the wife will be explaining something that she's bothered about and how that a guy wants to go into fix-it mode. But she doesn't want him to fix it. She wants him to feel it. And 90% of the time, she wants him to feel it and just understand what she's feeling. Well, we go into fix-it mode all the time. And I think there are times that we've just got to say, God, I don't have the answer. Talk about vulnerability. We got to be vulnerable to ourselves sometimes. Right. To just be honest and say, who do you think you are, man? You're not Jesus Christ. You're not God. Yeah. You're a guy with limited strength and weakness and understanding. So for me, I found that I have to spend some time just really clearing my head with God and saying, God, help me to understand this thing. Now, is everything a matter of prayer? No. Yeah. But in some cases it is. Mm-hmm. Now, I would say this. There is so much wisdom out there that we can get. Humble yourself and ask questions. Yes. It's amazing what you learn when you ask questions. Absolutely.
I think you're the fourth or fifth guest I've had that said, we go into fix-it mode. And I know my wife, she listens to every one of these. She's going to say, are you ever going to take that advice that these people keep giving you? Because you keep trying to fix my problems.
Yeah, sorry.
So that's a great segue. 35 years you've been married. Obviously, it takes communication and vulnerability and everything to a marriage. You got to cultivate a marriage throughout time. What's some of your advice? I have a lot of young listeners, just married or going through a season of, they got divorced and something happened. How do you keep the relationship going for 35 years? What's some of your keys to success?
I think there's certain things that would be a trite comment there, like communication. I've heard a lot of people say communication is important. Well, here's the thing that I think is always true. If you were to take a hold of the steering wheel of a car and try to drive it down the road by just holding the wheel perfectly straight, you will not go in a straight line. You'll go in the ditch. Yeah. But you have to constantly adjust to keep that thing going straight. And I think especially guys, I think guys want the girl to never change. Mm-hmm. I think girls believe that they will change the guy, and both are disappointed in the reality. Right. So my constant contact with couples is whatever you do, keep communicating, because you're going to keep changing, especially a lady. My wife is a very different woman than she was, and I'm different too. I mean, who am I kidding? But I think for most couples, the reason they get frustrated is they expect this, but they got that. Well, the reason they got that is they didn't communicate that what they got wasn't what they wanted.
Right.
They didn't somehow let the other person know that I was thinking this was going to happen and instead this happened and I'm really disappointed. Instead, we allow that disappointment just to seep down inside of us, and we put it in the crock pot of our mind, and we turn up the heat and dwell on it, and it just breeds all kinds of other negative activities.
Right.
When if we just simply said, I don't like this because I want this, and we communicate those things, then we give the other person the chance to respond to. Maybe we realize, gosh, I shouldn't want that, or maybe there's something else that I didn't know about why that request wasn't in line. But I think the biggest problem is changes happen and we don't communicate what we want, and we get disappointed, and then we dwell on that disappointment, and that breeds all kinds of other actions that are not good.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been married 15 years now. Hopefully I'll make it to that 35.
Yeah, good job.
And
buddy.
I think it's just because you got to know them 15 years ago, you still got to get to know your spouse. Right? You still got to learn about them and know about them, because they're changing too, and that's a key to the communication and all the cliche things we say. But great points. So when we met on Zoom a few months ago now, you said a couple of things that really resonated with me, and people say those things every once in a while. And you're like, I just got to write that down, and I'm going to read it just so I don't get it wrong. You said, men need to make better men. Can you just expound on that first one there first, because I think that is so relevant.
Yeah, so when I think about, there's a verse in the Bible that says iron sharpens iron, and we could first look at making better men of the men around us, of the men that are our sons, of the men that we lead, of the men even that we follow. And so in some way, we could make better men of them by challenging them and making the best of them and believing the best in them.
Right.
John Maxwell says, put a 10 on every head. In other words, look at someone and go, that's a winner. I'm going to believe in them, and I'm going to get behind them and support them. But really, there's no such thing as me making a better man out of someone else if I am not making a better man out of me.
Oh, wow, yes.
And so with everything, and especially back to this discussion about couples, hey, if there's a problem in your marriage, it's pretty easy to sit and pick at the other person and point out their qualities. But Andy Stanley says, rather than trying to find the right person, become the right person. Yeah. And so I really believe that whenever I'm pointing at someone else, there are 3 fingers pointing back at me, and 3 out of 4 times I need to work on me and then worry about someone else 1/4 of the time. If we all followed that procedure, we'd all become great men and women.
Right.
So making better men is a daily task. I am successful if I have made me a better man today than I was yesterday.
Right.
And I've got this day to make myself a better man, and I'm going to do that. And it's sort of like the Groundhog Day movie, Finally he decides to give up despair and just use this phenomenon of the repeating day to make himself a better man.
Yeah.
And when he does, he wins the heart of the wonderful girl. And I think that's the mindset guys need to have. How can I make myself, I've got 24 hours today, what can I do to make me a better man? And in so doing, the men around you are going to go to a higher level. Because men are moved by other men.
You're right.
When they see a guy doing it, they're like, I'm going to do it too.
Yeah. That reminds me, when my son was born 13 years ago, we came home from the hospital, and I remember going to work for the first time after, and I sat in my truck and I told myself, I just said it out loud, you will be the best husband, father, and ranger you can be today.
Love that.
And realize you're going to fail at one of those 3 every day, and that's okay, as long as you're striving to be the best you can. I think some people lose sight that they can make an impact. Even if you don't have other sons, you can go coach the team, or just the way you carry yourself helps other people become better people.
Absolutely.
So, and the other thing he said, you can lose or you can really lose, which I thought was very interesting.
My sons both can quote that back to me all the time. And I just explain to them, when it comes to marriage, you can lose or you can really lose. And what I would mean by that is, let's imagine that my wife is not happy with me about how I've blown it in some way. That's losing. Really losing is pointing out all of her flaws.
Yes, that's a fact.
So you can lose or you can really lose. Be content with losing. I often even say it in a way that I think is much more positive. And that is, if you can tell people to focus on themselves rather than the other person, that's a far better approach. So here's what I mean by that. Let's imagine that my wife is unhappy with me for being messy. Well, if I would just go ahead and clean up a little bit, she wouldn't be unhappy with me. So I'm losing by having to clean up, but I'm not really losing by her being mad.
Right.
In effect, I've lost twice. There's a mess and she's unhappy. If I pick up the mess, then that's a lot better situation. And it's so funny. Guys are like, I'm just so sick of her complaining about this. Well, dude, stop doing it.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
right.
if you don't want her to complain anymore, maybe do the thing, because it's not like she's asking you to somehow, go charge a hill and kill yourself. She's asking you to just pick up your stinking socks.
Yes.
You know, so it's just like we get upset as guys over the dumbest things.
We do. Yeah.
Just accept that little loss of having to go along with what she asks you to do.
Right.
And you'll be happier and she'll be happier.
Right. It's about being more intentional, right?
Yeah.
In your moment, like sitting there, is the result of me being a pain about this really worth it? Worth the argument in the long run, and that big loss, that really loss, because you're going to lose anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you're going to really lose.
Exactly.
Right? So raising kids, there's another.
Yep.
You've done it.
Yes,
right?
sir.
That's a full-time job.
Absolutely.
I realize every time I have 4 kids, that's full-time. Try to keep them inside the lines. What's some advice you have, looking back as a father, that you can impart?
So, this is a very important thing to me, not just because it's sons and family and all that, but I grew up with a very poor father. He was an alcoholic. He was abusive in a lot of ways. And I remember sitting in my dorm room in college, my freshman year, with an assignment of writing a paper about my family and just having this very emotional, I don't know what I would call it, sort of a washing of all that junk inside of me. I thank God for it. It was sort of a healing. And sitting there gritting my teeth saying, I will not be a bad father. Mm-hmm. And so I really was dedicated to being the best father I could be. If there are conferences about being a dad, if there are books about it, this was before podcasts, but if there's some broadcast on the radio or whatever, I would try to listen to it. I'd try to be the best dad I could be. I had a role that allowed me to be at all my son's events, and so I never missed an event. And I even got up and spent time each morning. I'm a morning person, so I got up and made breakfast, and then we spent some time talking about God and life and things like that. I even gave him something that John had given me years ago called IDEA: instruction, demonstration, exposure, and assessment. Instruction is teaching them a truth. Demonstration is helping them see this truth lived out. Exposure is them going and doing it. And then assessment is, how did you do?
Right.
And so we would do instruction, demonstration one day, where here's the truth. Now, guys, watch and see people who live this out today. And then exposure and assessment the next day. And so that morning we'd get up, okay, what did you guys see? All right, today, go out and do it yourself. Maybe it's about being honest. Don't lie about anything. Be honest. And they would go implement it. And then on the way home or later that night before bed, how'd it go today, guys? What did you experience as a result of being honest? Wasn't that a good thing? And that instruction, demonstration, exposure, assessment idea was really critical to getting a truth inside of them and not just in their mind.
Right.
Getting it lived out. Instruction, demonstration, exposure, and assessment. So they're really fine men, and I'm super proud of them.
It's what I'm hearing. You don't just be a parent. You don't just parent and let it happen. You're being strategic about it.
Strategic,
you're thinking
and intentional.
About it.
Absolutely.
You're leading your family.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we take for granted how intelligent our kids are. Mm-hmm. Right. I recently stepped down from coaching my son's football team, which was hard, but I had so much other stuff going on that I wasn't being able to be present in any moment.
Wow.
And what the biggest thing was, I brought him in and we sat down and talked about it.
Oh, so
and I
smart.
said, are you okay with me doing this? And he said, well, I prefer you, coach, but I understand. And we left there, I felt better. He felt better, and we were able to move forward better. And it's everything that makes you successful as a husband can make you successful as a father.
Well, I think you should be proud of yourself that your son wanted you to continue coaching, because most sons would be like, Dad, please stop coaching me. Because you're so overbearing as a father.
He's a really smart kid. So inside, he was probably like, yes, I got it. I'm free again, free at last. So in the military, we obviously find ourselves moving around
Sure.
a lot, especially the officer community. Every 2 years, they pick up and they move, and transition is hard,
Yes, sir.
right? And especially as your family grows and your kids get older and you got to move them. I think you've probably done the same
Sure.
as a pastor, and
Very
you've
much
seen
so.
a lot with people who come to the community and leave the community. How do you deal with transition?
Yeah, it's not easy. The great Mark Twain said the only person who likes change is a wet baby.
Yeah.
Other than that, no one else likes change. I have to say that having changed and gone through a lot of challenging circumstances, I did come to a point where I said, I'm going to do everything I can to settle and stay somewhere for a while. The most important thing for me is what you just did with your son, and that is having communication, conversation, explaining the why, explaining why we're in this situation and why, in the role that we're in, this is what is demanded. It's a part of the job. And, hey, I'm sorry for the challenges that you're having to face as a result of this. Here's what I can do to ameliorate, to make up for those kinds of things. But I think being communicative and helping everyone involved in the change know why is pretty critical. When you come in and you're like, look, we're moving, everyone get over it. That's not going to win a whole lot of fans. That's going to win some enemies.
Yeah.
And but taking time to explain and understand and hear the concerns, because I will say this. That is not just important for you to communicate to them. It's important for you to hear some things from them that you maybe didn't realize. Oh, my goodness, I didn't know that. My son, one time, we had to move him out of a school to another school, and he made this comment. He said, I feel like a molecule in this new school. And what I've come to find out is that I needed to help with the process of him connecting with kids locally. And so we got him involved in some other things, and it completely changed it for him.
Right.
It totally got him engaged because he was just weary of new connections, and he wasn't engaging.
Yeah.
So once we got him engaged, it helped. I learned that because I talked to him and found out what was going on.
Yeah, that's transition is tough, especially on the family.
Yeah.
And I think you sometimes just want to be heard.
Sure.
They just want to voice their opinion of it. The military said you're moving, right?
Yeah.
The move's happening.
Yep.
But understanding them, having them be heard can stimulate conversation, relieve some of the angst in it. And similar thing, we moved in one part of the county to another part of the county, which meant our kids had to go to a different school.
Sure.
Which to me, I was like, it's fine. They're just moving.
Yep.
But I'd lost sight. My wife luckily did not. That we'd moved a lot till then, and we had the opportunity to leave them in the same school. And just because we were going to have to drive them and they couldn't take the bus, it was worth it to them, right? It was worth it to them. So you got to find a middle ground and communicate and talk and
no question.
And seek to understand, not be understood.
Exactly right.
Right? Absolutely. I can't ask you without sitting here underneath leadership. And we talked about vulnerability.
Yeah.
What is leadership?
Well, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less, is John's line, and everything rises and falls with leadership. If it succeeds, it's usually because a leader made it happen. If it fails, it's usually a failure of leadership.
Yeah.
So leadership is influence. It's not necessarily a position. And I know in a military scenario, it is a position often, but I'm talking about effective leadership is about influence. For example, a person could take over a leadership role, but someone within that particular organization actually have more influence than they, even though they have the role. And so the key thing is to ask yourself as a leader, how can I gain more influence? John Maxwell taught something called the 5 levels of influence or leadership. And basically it begins with you have the position, so you have that level of influence. But then it's about relationships and the fact that you're building a friendship and a relationship with other people in the organization. But then it's about production. You can't go just on relationship. You have to produce for the organization. Yeah. So the 3rd level is production. The 4th level is people development. People follow you because of what you've done for them. You've impacted them. And then lastly, because you do all 4 of those for a long period of time, you get to what's known as the pinnacle level, the highest level of influence. But you can't put yourself on that level. Those you lead put you on that level. Yeah. So it starts with the position. You do the job that you're supposed to do. It continues with relationships. People follow you because they like you. It continues with production. People follow you because of what you've done for the organization. Then people follow you because of what you've done for them. And then after doing that for a long period of time, you get to the pinnacle level, and the people put you on that level.
Yes.
And that's how you build influence. So if you're in a new organization and you got the position, well, you need to build relationships.
Yeah.
If you've got relationships, man, you got to produce. If you've produced, well, now you got to really develop and build your team. You got to get them strong. And if you do that and you keep doing all those other three, you're going to get to a very high level of influence in the organization.
Right. And you said a perfect word there that I've been talking about and wrote a little about is influence. Mm-hmm. And I think it's lost some of its meaning in this society of influencers, right? Mm-hmm. It can be very shallow. What's your thought on just influence and influencers and what influence actually means?
Yeah, influence is when you can cause someone to take an action, change a belief, or think something differently. So that's what influence is. Whenever you have influence, people follow more naturally than they do just because you have a position.
Yeah.
In other words, they'll follow you beyond your position. They'll follow you beyond your job description. They'll follow you beyond the hours of the day or the particular commitment required. Years ago, I studied the Civil War, and there's a famous Civil War general not far from where I'm from by the name of Phil Sheridan. Mm-hmm. And they said that Phil Sheridan on a battlefield was worth a whole regiment. He just had this way of putting something in to other men that made them willing to risk their lives. That is influence. It motivates and inspires people beyond what others might be willing to do.
Yeah. And you're right, in the military space, as soon as you walk in a room, you have rank on you and you expect people to follow you and do it. It's when I ask them if you didn't have that, would you still have the same effect? That's when it really matters.
That's a great definition.
Yeah, that's when it really matters. So to kind of wrap it up here, I'll ask the same question I ask everybody. So if you could go back, and 20 years, you're 20 years old, and give 20-year-old RD some advice, what advice would you give him?
Yeah, so in my mind, the things that most affect our lives are things that we do that we shouldn't do, and things that we don't do that we should do. So sins of omission and sins of commission, you might say. And so you have to understand that the battles you don't fight at a young age, you will fight a bigger battle over in a later age. So if there's any kind of struggle you're dealing with, I encourage you to defeat that thing right now, because one day it'll get even bigger and it'll be more challenging to defeat. The second thing I would say to you is you are not what you could be at all at a young age. You are just such a small version of what you could be. You have no idea of your potential. Yeah. You have no concept of the impact you could make. There is no possible way I could have imagined working with John Maxwell. And this past year, we've already impacted about 4 million people in some way around the world. We've helped millions of kids. I just could not have imagined it.
Right.
And I look back and I'm so thankful for all the things I did to grow myself, to invest in myself, to learn and build myself up and develop my knowledge and my leadership ability. Because I'll tell you, the biggest disappointment I have is that I'm not further down the road. If I had been as intentional and as determined, I would go back and say, fight those big battles that you got to fight right now, because they're going to get bigger, not smaller. Secondly, grow yourself to be the greatest man you can be, because if you do, all of your dreams come true. Now, I realize life's tough and we face challenges, but trust me, whatever challenges you face, you're going to be far better because you've grown before them than if you just choose to wait and see what happens. So just understand this. God don't make no junk. You're amazing. You just don't realize it. Invest in yourself, grow yourself, because there's mountains you're going to take that you never could have imagined.
Absolutely. Taking. Well, I appreciate you taking the time this morning. I appreciate all you do for the community and the people that you impact. And I can't believe some of the people I know through relationships, right? So go out there and build a relationship. Thanks a lot. Hopefully we can maybe do this again sometime.
Oh, man. Thank you, Yuma. It's been an honor. And to all of those that are watching and listening, I want you to know when I get done with this, I'm going to say a prayer for every one of you. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for who you are. We love you and are proud to call you our countrymen. Thank you.